Now, I must mention to the audience that it's really a great pleasure and a wonderful privilege to have one of my very dear colleagues formerly from the Center for Political Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, to talk on her co-authored book with Dr. Sajjan Kumar, about whom I've heard all the best things from Professor Sudha Pai. I remember her talking very highly of his work and his enthusiasm. And we are really looking forward to this presentation because, as you very well know, India is undergoing a fair amount of churn, and the temple will be inaugurated on the 22nd of January. There is an information technology bill. There is the powers of the Chief Election Commissioner have been reduced. Civil society organizations and opposition politicians have been attacked in a number of ways. And at this conjuncture, Professor Sudha Pai and her co-author, Dr. Sajjan Kumar, have basically given us a very good proposition to understand, which is what is going to be the face of Dalit politics in India's most populous state, Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh, as we very well know, is the most populous Indian state. It also sends the largest number of people to the Indian Parliament, and that Parliament will very soon have an election. So I think the scholarly insights of Professor Sudha Pai and Dr. Sajjan Kumar are very, very timely for us, and I'm sure for all others who from outside Heidelberg who are able to attend this session. So Sudha, the floor is yours, and Dr. Sajjan Kumar, how long do you think you want to present?
I think we had agreed that each of us would take some 20 to 22 minutes, and then
That's perfect. That's perfect. So the floor is yours.
Be enough. What I
I think 20 to 25 minutes for both of you is just perfect.
Okay. And
right.
what
and then
we do is I will lay out the main arguments of the book, and then Sajjan will look at what has been the fallout of whatever has been happening that we have documented about Dalit politics, and also the lead up to 2024, because I know that although our book doesn't deal with it very frontally, we do have an epilogue, but he will deal with it because he has been doing field work in the last few months as well. He is well positioned to do that. So, do I start?
Yes, please. I will sit and watch you from them. Yeah.
Okay. Well, firstly, I must thank Professor Rahul Mukherjee and the Department of Politics, South Asia Institute, Heidelberg University for inviting us and for giving us a chance to place our ideas in this book before all of you. And we look forward to your critical comments and discussion on our talk today. Now, it's true that much was written on Dalit politics in the 1990s. What our book does is that it looks at the change Dalit politics in the 2000s. Why has Dalit discourse and how has it responded to the changes that are taking place in the 2000s, particularly in the shadow of the rise of the right-wing hegemony, or what is often called Hindutva? Why do we look at UP? This is because in UP there are three rapidly shifting scenarios which very well portray the crisis in Dalit politics. First, you have the decline of the BSP under Mayawati and identity politics that once drove mass and electoral politics in UP, as well as affected national politics. Second, you have the shift of a considerable amount of the Dalits towards the BJP under the leadership of Narendra Modi, who represents a new generation within the BJP as such. And thirdly, you have the rise of a new leader, Chandrashekhar Azad in Western UP, and other smaller leaders. These, in fact, He is the best known, but there are a large number of small organizations which have come. And we also look at what the rise of these organizations mean for the Dalit movement, which then we argue is facing fragmentation along, class, ideological, and sub-regional lines in UP and North India. So it's this triangular contestation between Maya, Modi, and Azad, and the political possibilities it presents that makes our narrative of significance and places Dalit politics in the Hindi heartland within the larger shifts that have taken place in Indian politics in the 2000s. Now, of course, the central aim of the book is to understand the existential crisis that is facing the BSP, which was once a very dominant party in Uttar Pradesh. As we know, in the UP Assembly election in 2014, in the general elections in 2014, in which Narendra Modi first came to power, the BSP performed very badly and it had no seat at all. And but it still did get about 20% of the vote. But if you look at the Assembly election of 2022, the BSP got one seat, but it got just 12% of the votes. So undoubtedly, there has been a certain decline of the party through the 2000s. Of course, immediate failures are there on the part of Mayawati, which we also put forward in the book in detail. You have corruption during 2007 and 2012 regime. There's a steady depletion of the BSP's organizational strength due to failure to rebuild the Muslim-Dalit alliance after the Muzaffarnagar riots of 2013. Your expulsion, defection of senior and influential BSP leaders post-2012, which has led to a certain hollowing out of the party as we argue. There's also the lack of an alternative ideology following the failure of the Sajjan experiment. And today we have also lackluster campaigning on the part of Mayawati, particularly after 2019. But longer-term developments have also played a very seminal role. If we look at UP, social and political change has been very rapid in this state throughout the 90s and in the 2000s. And the resulting shifts are reflected in changes within the Dalit community. Globalization was late in UP. Its impact was felt late compared to southern and western India because the 1990s was a decade of hung assemblies, short-lived governments, very little policy making, etc. And it was this weakening of identity politics by the late 1990s that led to a feeling of being left behind and a shift from a desire for social justice to rising economic aspirations for material advancement. In fact, a very heightened one by, during the 2000s as well. Simultaneously, the smaller subcastes in the backward regions of UP were also in the beginning of the 2000s entering the political arena and experiencing what we have called cultural modernization. So our work points to a new relationship between caste, development and electoral politics, which helps explain, we argue, the decline of the BSP between caste, development and electoral politics, which helps explain the decline of the BSP on the one hand, the BJP's successful outreach to the Dalits in a new form of inclusionary politics, as well as the emergence of Dalit organizations from parties such as the Bhim Army of Chandrashekhar Azad. So these shifts have created extreme volatility in UP. If you look at three successive elections, the BSP gained a majority in 2007, the SP in the 2012 assembly elections, and it was the BJP that performed very well in the 2014 general elections. Equally important at the same time are longer-term inherent weaknesses within the Dalit movement in UP, which have come to the fore today. While there was consolidation behind the BSP in the 1990s of all Dalit subcastes, it was only insofar as voting was concerned. Where Bahujan identity and consciousness, which was formulated by Kanchiram, is concerned, it didn't penetrate downwards into all the various subcastes. It remained an elite and not a mass phenomenon. So it was the numerically larger, dominant, better off Samaj Jatas, mainly located in Western UP, who were influenced by it and who were united by it, and who still remain loyal to Mayawati. The smaller, poorer subclastes, for example, the Valmiki, which may be taken up in some detail in the book, In the more backward regions, the subjected to Hinduization since the colonial period have retained their specific subcaste identity. So the result has been that rather than identity important in defining and cementing socio-political relations among Dalit groups earlier, in the 2000s today, what we find are social jealousy, cultural aspirations, and economic anxieties which are the driving forces. So the Dalit movement today is fragmented into the pro-BSP or Ambedkarite and the pro-BJP or Hindutva party Dalits. But having said that, each of these groupings are very complex and they are further subdivided on the ground and remain extremely complex. Another contributory factor was the shift in the mid-1990s by the BSP from a radical movement to a competitive party to capture power. So the result was that downward mobilization of the smaller subcastes, which had been going on in the early 1990s and particularly in the 1980s, such as the Parsis, Musawat, and Valmikis, especially in the backward regions, did not take place. Also, the shift from a social movement to an institutionalized political party in order to capture power led to political compromise in ideology and strategy in the 1990s. This is true not just of the Dalit movement in UP, it's true of Dalit parties across the country. For example, if you look at Hugo Godin's work on Tamil Nadu, where the Dalit Panthers are concerned. The BSP, in comparison to the Dalit Panthers, did achieve some success because it shared power with the BJP in the 1990s. Mayawati became chief minister 3 times, and it did gain a majority in 2007. But the Sajjan experiment created differences, and a return to the ideology of social justice has just not been possible. Nor has the leadership thrown up any new ideas in keeping with the changing political situation. A feature that impacted in the 2000s is that the BSP was formed primarily to provide Dalits dignity, self-confidence, and empowerment. It is not meant to be and is not a party equipped for providing an alternative economic agenda to deal with the problems with Dalits in what one could say in the more conventional sense. By the time Mayawati attempted her Sajjan experiment in 2007, in which she tried to provide development to all castes, class, regions, etc., it was too late. Firstly, the UP economy, the competitive populism in the 1990s by both the SP and the BSP was in bad shape. In fact, it was in a death trap. With the funds provided by the central UPA government, Mayawati did achieve a great deal. She spent on welfare programs, built tremendous amount of infrastructure. In fact, much of the infrastructure being inaugurated by Modi since 2014 dates back to its beginnings from the Mayawati period as well. Also, we find that throughout her, between 2007 and 2012, GDP was as much as 7.5%. But she lost power because the material expectations of Dalits by the time were much too high to be met within a short span of 5 years. Dalits had expected their economic conditions would undergo a very dramatic change, making them equal to the upper caste, which is just not possible. Also, they felt the upper caste had benefited much more. This defeat in 2012 led to a large number of Dalits shifting to the SP. It's later in 2014 that they shifted to the BJP. So it was this unhappiness with the BSP and the newfound confidence that Dalits had gained by the 2000s that explains the search for a new party that would offer them economic advancement. And here the BJP comes into the picture. Beginning in 2014, the BJP under Narendra Modi has won a number of resounding victories in UP, both in the assembly elections and in the general elections. Very early, Modi realized that to win power at the center, he needed to perform well in UP, which, as you know, sends 80 members of parliament, to parliament as well. From the mid-1990s, one could say, the RSS had already been mobilizing on the ground. Earlier, the OBCs, because it was around the Ram Janmabhoomi Babri Masjid movement. But by the early 2000s, they began to mobilize the Dalits as well. For example, Yogi Adityanath builds a power structure of his own in Eastern UP as well. This was done because the RSS and parts of the BJP felt that under Vajpayee, the Hindutva ideology of the BJP had been shelved, and hence the party had declined. Modi harnessed this. No, his achievement is really that he saw this mobilization, he harnessed it, and particularly of the smaller Dalits, and then he defined Hindutva as subaltern Hindutva and took it forward, achieving success. More important, under the BJP under him, has successfully gained increasing percentage of votes in the smaller Dalit subclass. The aim has been twofold: electoral to defeat the social justice party and gain control over the swing state. Second, cultural, to bring the Dalits and backwards into the saffron fold in order to build a consolidated Hindu identity. Much has been written on the methods used by Modi and the BJP. I just mentioned some. During the electoral campaign beginning in 2014, the BJP has employed a multi-layered, inclusionary, socio-economic, and communal cultural discourse ranging from deftly bringing together promises of rapid development and communal discourse, reinventing Hindutva as subaltern ideology, use of nationalism and rather hyper-nationalism as it's often called, and religiosity, and social media to build the social brand of a party, the brand image of a party and its leader. Particularly for the smaller subclass, this has been a new politics of recognition of their very distinct cultural identity, which they felt was neglected by the BSP, and which they have come over the years to view as a mainly Jata party. These strategies began in 2014, provided the BJP and maybe a template, which has then been carried forward in subsequent elections, not just to maintain, but in fact gain greater support from this section of Dalits. Much of this is well known. More important for our work is what is the interface between a declining Dalit movement and rising Hindutva, which we argue is not so simple, it's layered and it's complex. So we examine two contradictory positions. One, while Dalits protest strongly against upper caste atrocities, why do they then vote support the BJP in the very next elections? Also, is this support, electoral support, tactical and instrumental due to the decline of the BSP, or does it reflect conversion of Dalits to the Hindutva ideology? The decision of tactical or ideological is of importance in order to understand the future of the Dalit movement. While the provision of economic benefits by the government, by the Modi government, often described as new welfareism, in which you have bank accounts, cooking gas, toilets, housing, free rations, cash, etc. It is different from the very traditional kind of things that are promised to electors, such as education, roads, hospitals, etc. Because it's felt that these give far more immediate benefits. All this is projected as part of a well-organized welfare state and has successfully played the role of the new politics of redistribution, creating what are called Bharatiya or beneficiaries. So this is one kind of explanation that has been given. Our field work points to some political and cultural factors as well. The smaller Dalit subclass have long preferred to vote or support the party that will provide them protection against the locally dominant caste, primarily the Yadavs and the SP, which they view as a Gunda, that is a mafia party. While in the 1919s, it was the BSP that provided them protection of life and property. Today, they feel that only the BJP can provide them this protection. Also, they associate atrocities not with the BJP, but generally with the upper caste. And they also argue that they faced similar, if not more atrocities actually under SP rule. Moreover, the BSP, apart from very symbolic condemnation, in recent years does not take part in protests. Benji doesn't step out at all. The protests are led by the new Dalit organizations investing into the Bhim Army, in Purvanchal, it's the Ambedkar Jan Morcha and other smaller and not so well known organizations. So we argue for both political dynamism and electoral determinants. That is the assertion and integration, and it is simultaneous. There are two levels of the gulf between them. The political is dynamic, it's full of contradictions and protests, but the electoral realm is insulated from the political. There will be agitation against injustice, but it will not flow into or translate into an autonomous, successful Dalit politics. So we have a very complex situation. There is respect for Bharatiya, that is Mayawati as a very tall leader still. Azad is called in when atrocities take place because he knows how to deal with the police. But the vote is cast for the BJP. Coming to the second question, whether support to the BJP is practical and instrumental or ideological come cultural. If we adopt the binary viewpoint, it means we see the present day preference for the BJP as the product of the more immediate developments, but ignore historical processes. Much literature shows that there was a process of Hinduization in North India among the smaller subcastes, such as the Balmikis. As I said, we examined the role of the Balmikis in the late 19th century. Hinduization was initially a quiet feature in post-independent India. But with the rise of the BJP under Modi, it's a more open societal and political project with reflection in the electoral process. In fact, what we are witnessing is simultaneously tactical and ideological attraction towards the BJP. The initial shift is often driven by calculated considerations such as the better economic incentives promised by the BJP, and it's also in power. Thereafter, if the electoral support sustains for an extended period to the BJP, then let's move into the saffron fold, along with emphasis on material issues, cultural issues pertaining to linking the Dalit subcaste histories with the deities of the Hindu pantheon have acquired a new momentum. Here, Badri Narayan's work shows this very clearly. However, if the duration of the shift were not to sustain beyond one or two elections, the Dalit interface could be called tactical. So reversals back and forth are possible, but do not seem likely in the near future. These intermittent patterns of tactic and ideology are visible historically in the trajectory of the Dalit movement in India. Hinduization has taken deep roots in Indian society, and even if the BJP were to lose state power, there will be no social reversal. The support could be seen to be at two levels. Some subcastes may prefer the BJP due to ideological affinity, while others tactically for the material incentive. But the fascination with being Hindu has taken deep roots and will continue, particularly on the cultural field. What does all this mean for the BSP? Does it mean that the BSP has outlived its foundational purpose and thereby its usefulness for Dalits? I think it's important to underline that the BSP has in great measure fulfilled its original promise of providing Dalits identity and self-respect and contributed to the social deepening of democracy in India. Having obtained a measure of consciousness and self-confidence, a significant section of Dalits are in search of a political party or movement that can offer them economic benefit and are also attracted to the idea of inclusion within the larger Hindu identity. We argue in our book that the Dalit movement in UP has entered a post-BSP phase, a development which need not be seen in negative light as much has been achieved. Two features make this clear. First, we are witnessing the maturing of the Dalit movement in North India, with Dalits confident of making their own political electoral choices and moving towards different parties depending on the situation. Other castes, the upper castes and backwards, have exercised their political preferences. They have moved to lower caste parties such as the SP and the BSP. Dalits too are now exercising their options. Second, despite the decline of the BSP, it has left the legacy of strong Dalit assertion on the ground, and as our narrative shows, we are witnessing multiple forms of assertion in UP. The Bhim Army being, as I said, one of the best known. The BSP will not disappear like the RPI as it has established roots, but an autonomous Dalit politics under its leadership as in its heyday in the 1990s will no longer be possible. The BSP could occupy a position similar to the Dalit Panther, recently celebrating their 50th. They did it in last year in the 50th anniversary, who despite having no strong party or organization and often divided into groups, touched the lives of a section of Dalits and whose ideas still wield considerable influence in Bharat. Thank you. I think I'll stop here. And Sajjan Kumar, thank you.
Yeah, I now request Dr. Sajjan Kumar to carry forward the presentation. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yeah. Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Rahul Mukherjee and Political Science Department, Heidelberg University, for giving us the opportunity to present our book. Now, as Professor Pai has laid down the core arguments and the findings of the book, I'll pick from there and build upon the three aspects. One, what do we see the state of Dalit universe and Dalit discourse on the ground, particularly in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Second, we'll also briefly connect it to it, touch the methodological approach that we employed while writing the book. And three, the finding and their implication for the contemporary state of Dalit discourse and by extension, Indian democracy also. Coming to the approach of methodological approach, Dalit ontology has many episteme, many perspectives already. And when we decided to write the book, there were many frames that were already being employed. Already the question that from a once unified and politically very solidified Dalit discourse that became a fact in the late 1980s to the 2014 onward, a clear fragmentation of the Dalit political discourse, particularly in the electoral realm, was visible. And much of the academic debate, along with the debates in media, had a very normative weight behind the deliberation. The fragmentation within the Dalit discourse was seen as a moment of crisis, not only for the Dalit discourse, but also for the Indian democracy, because a unified Dalit discourse was seen as a very desirable fact on the parameters of equitable, social justice oriented, normative desirability of the democracy. And when they started fragmenting, and particularly to the right-wing parties like BJP, much of the academic debate had the subtle concern behind those deliberations. And therefore, we decided to take the question, and rather than approaching through a pre-given theoretical framework, we decided to employ the epistemological realism to try to map the ground, particularly the Dalit universe, both the activists, politicians, and the commoners, and then try to find a trend, pattern, and try to see, can we theorize that? And therefore, one of the facts that we witnessed was the process of an ongoing dynamic fragmentation of the Dalit discourse. Now, that fragmentation in the cover of the book is seen between Mayawati and Azad, Chandrashekhar Azad. Now, Chandrashekhar Azad is just one gateway. He just signifies a very dynamic process of the fragmentation that the Dalit universe is witnessing at multiple levels. And he is not the only one. He is just one of the symbol of that process. Now, that fragmentation is happening both within Ambedkarite Dalit discourse as well as between Ambedkarite Dalit discourse versus what we call is Hindutva's Dalit discourse. And therefore, when we take the question of first, how do we witness the intra-Ambedkarite Dalit discourse fragmentation, the reasons behind it, the whys, and also the modus operandi is very interesting and very novel. First, if you map out the decade of 1980s, the decade that saw the arrival of BSP as a political force in the politics of UP, that also marks the question of who is an authentic Dalit. And if you go by the founder of BSP, Kanchiram, an authentic Dalit is the one who goes for an autonomous Ambedkarite politics rather than integrating with the mainstream parties across ideological spectrum. Because if you are integrating with the mainstream political parties, be it Congress or be it socialist parties or any parties, what you are representing is the stooges of the Brahmanical system, because all the mainstream parties to Kashiram or to the Ambedkarite discourse of 1980s represents the interest of the dominant section. And therefore, the age of stooges, wherein Kashiram declares all the tall Dalit leaders within Congress like Jagjeevan Ram or Ram Vilas Paswan, etc., as the stooges of the Dalit, and therefore he defines who it's not enough to be born as a Dalit, but you also have to be a Dalit in a coherent way into a frame, and that is by declaring your autonomous frame away from the mainstream frame which represents the dominant power structure. Now from there, when you witness the new generation of Dalit leaders today in 2020s, there is a sense of anger. When we talk in generational term, there is a much talk about the millennials, late millennials, and Gen Zs. And in Indian academia, there is a pretension as if the Gen Z and the late millennials belong to a metropolitan, humanity, liberal arts oriented voices who have a power of articulation. We do forget that this category of age also applies to the tribals, to the Dalits, to tier 2, tier 3 towns, to the Mufassils, and to the villages. And we also witness a entire new generation of Dalits. And Chandrashekhar Azad is just one of them, who are located strongly within the Ambedkarite framework, but are angry with the elderly Dalit Ambedkarite leaders for betraying the mandate that was given by Kashiram in 1980s. The mandate to follow a very assertive, movement-oriented Dalit politics, which is not being carried out by the mantle takers of the BSP, which represents the 1980s unified Dalit politics. And therefore, you see among Chandrashekhar Azad, who represents the Western UP Dalit universe, primarily the youths, along with Shravan Kumar Nirala, who erstwhile belonged to BSP, but now represents the Dalit politics, Ambedkarite Dalit politics in Purvanchal, Eastern UP. You also see an erstwhile colleague, Daddu Prasad, in Bundelkhand region. They all represent an angry Dalit universe for vis-a-vis their elderly colleagues for betraying the mandate of Kashiram. And you also witness there is a politics of impatience. While 1980s Dalit politics and Dalit discourse signified an institutionalized approach to Dalit politics, which while asserted the Dalit self and a new Dalit politics, was also having an approach that they have to be patient for a longer duration to bring some tangible change. So BSP represented a politics of patience, an institutionalized approach, wherein do's and don'ts were clear, wherein you see a normative markers. It did not indulge in everydayness of the politics. And that is why Kashiram's clear mandate that Dalits don't need to join the radical left call or the Naxalite call, they have to choose ballot over the bullet. That was and therefore the anger needs to be qualitatively institutionalized, and an electoral and political investment has to be there. Compared to that, what we witness, the new Ambedkarite politics that we witness today, particularly that of Bhim Army and Chandrashekhar Azad version, they are into the politics of everydayness. They are into the politics of one event and a reaction. They are in the politics, what we call the politics of impatience. And that is one thing, because they think that time has changed so much so that they cannot bother to wait for a longer duration. And that sort of politics of impatience of the late Dalit millennials and Gen Zs goes in sync with the larger approach of politics with this new generation, be it on the question of climate or be in the question of mental health, etc. So you can find a politics of impatience is there, and that is why you also find within Ambedkarite framework, the anger is intense, and you find a politics of everyday agitation. Now, this politics of everyday agitation is all the more important among this set of Dalits, leaders, activists, and also their followers, because they think that if they do not take it in an intense way, in an urgent way, then whatever is left of the Ambedkarite Dalit remnant will vanish, because the older claimant, as Professor Pai said, and we argue in our book, like Mayawati, doesn't bother to hit the street, doesn't bother to take stock of what is happening on the Dalits and within the Dalit discourse, and they have completely abandoned the agitational and movement part of the BSP. And therefore, they think that the entire mantle of representing the urgency that the Ambedkarite discourse is feeling, wherein the Dalits are an autonomous, politics of Dalit is undergoing and to and receiving end, needs to be saved, needs to be secured, and therefore you see this politics of impatience. Now, this politics, new Dalit politics within Ambedkarite frame also has another aspect, and this is something that we will touch upon, that why do we see Ambedkarite Dalit versus another set of fragments, Hindutva Dalit discourse within the same generation, same young Dalits. And that is leading to the process of a very confident, muscular assertion. When we talk about the leadership style of Mayawati and Chandrashekhar Azad, you often witness Chandrashekhar Azad with his will-built body, a very twist mustache, baritone deep voice, ridiculing Mayawati for not being courageous enough. And this is a question Professor Pai and I asked Chandrashekhar Azad in our interview, that don't you represent a patriarchal gauge to your own leader, and particularly to a leader who is, being a woman, may feel unsafe to hit the ground, given the controversy like guest house controversy in early 1990s, wherein Samajwadi Party goons and leaders tried to kill Mayawati, and somehow she survived that attack and assault. Chandrashekhar Azad could not come up with a clear answer. The denial was very unconvincing, but certainly you find today when we witness the appeal of Chandrashekhar Azad, there is also a gender bias, because you find not only in Uttar Pradesh, but across the Hindi spectrum, you'll find that there is a fan club because of the social media of Chandrashekhar Azad. And what they want is an assertion of not only a Dalit identity, but also a subcaste identity. So I'm here making a contrarian argument to Manoj Mitta's book, Caste Pride, not a contrarian, but something more. Because if you take stock of the last 10 years of the Dalit politics, if one remembers that in 2017, when Saharanpur riots happened and Bhim Army and Chandrashekhar Azad came to the forefront, he became a known face. The earliest sign which he was identified with was "Welcome to the land of Great Chamar," the signboard which he had put up in front of his villages. So a very assertion of a subcaste pride that was there. Around the same time in 2015-16 in Punjab, where also the Dalits are in largest percentage, 1/3 of the population of Punjab is Dalit. And many of the Dalits are also into the non-resident Indian going abroad, and they have a financial arm also, financial muscle also. And therein you find Gini Mahi coming with a very popular pop song, the Danger Chamar. Danger Chamar is a most populous and politically assertive Dalit caste, which signified that how the Chamars, the Dalits, are asserting their caste identity with a sense of pride. So vis-a-vis 1980s and 1990s discourse of stigma, humiliation, and self-respect, today you see an assertion of the pride. And if you come across all the North Indian and Central Indian from Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Punjab, UP, Bihar, the signboards of Royal Jatav, Royal Chamars, etc. would be ubiquitously visible in front of the villages and in public square. So it's not just Ambedkar's statue, it's also the assertion of the pride. So the caste pride is no more just a phenomenon of the dominant caste, be it the upper caste or the dominant intermediary caste, that is the upper strata of the OBC. It is also a fact today that you witness among the subcaste of Dalit also. So when we witness this phenomenon of every single Dalit caste also taking a pride in their subcaste identity, it needs to be juxtaposed to Ambedkar's original dictum of annihilation of caste. In reality, to this new generation, who also want a Dalit unified discourse at a normative level, but they do not want to let go of their individual subcaste identity. So that means that annihilation of caste has metamorphosed to a new generation of Dalits, Ambedkarite and Hindutvavadis, as equalization of caste, but with the sense of not just equality, but a sense of pride. So caste identity needs to be retained. So if our individual caste identity with a sense of pride is the starting point to negotiate your sense of Dalit self, then certainly the 1980s declaration of who is going to be an authentic Dalit has undergone not only a qualitative change, but a multi-level of fragment. Today, being authentic Dalit self is mediated and negotiated through a very assertive and with a sense of pride, individual caste identity. And depending upon the political, ideological, and social location of various Dalits, you choose your ideological spectrum also. And therefore, within Ambedkarite Dalit, we have witnessed this generational divide. But that generational divide is just one aspect. Within the Ambedkarite fragment, we also witness a sub-regional divide. So as you move from Western UP, the den of Chandrashekhar Azad, to the Eastern UP, wherein you find Ambedkar Jan Morcha, another Ambedkarite experiment, and that is a chapter, the last part of our book. You find Ambedkar Jan Morcha being led by Shravan Kumar Nirala, who is in early 30s, used to be an ardent follower and position holder, zonal head of BSP, a very significant and powerful position within BSP, because since his early age, he was closer to the BSP leader and got very close to Mayawati. Now, Shravan Kumar Nirala also had the same set of criticism for Mayawati as you find in the articulation of Chandrashekhar Azad, with one difference that Shravan Kumar Nirala, because of his deep investment into BSP, also alleges the criticism of corruption and favors and nepotism vis-a-vis Mayawati. But more interesting is Shravan Kumar Nirala's engagement with Chandrashekhar Azad. To our question that when entire section of an entire votaries of new generation of Dalit leaders, Ambedkarite Dalit leaders, they all have one purpose: to restore the original mandate of BSP or Bahujan discourse, as was articulated by Kashiram in 1980s. Why can't they come together and work together? Because normatively, they all endorse that there should be a unified Dalit discourse, but it is the operation and modus operandi wherein you see the real fragmentation. Now, when we kept on pushing Shravan Kumar Nirala, one of the justification that Shravan Kumar Nirala did is very significant, sometimes hilarious also, but it gives you when the leaders are not very alert and when they give you a raw explanation. Nirala said that one of the reasons why he doesn't want to collaborate with Chandrashekhar Azad is simple. One, Chandrashekhar Azad doesn't have the institutional experience that he has. Chandrashekhar to Nirala is a troublemaker. He doesn't have a sense of responsibility. He doesn't take a stock of the state of the Dalit power configuration. Wherever Chandrashekhar Azad goes, as per Nirala, he provokes the Dalit, he creates a sense of anger, and once he leaves, there are atrocities by the state and the dominant section, while he keeps on getting the fame, and that is one of the internal tussle, that why a leader is more famous and why the others who are more embedded on the ground are not that famous. So while he gets the fame, the Dalit masses go to the jail. And that is why he, being more experienced in institutional politics, is doing a responsible Ambedkarite Dalit politics, wherein he is trying to do politics as mandated by Kashiram. But Beyond that, he offered one very interesting explanation, and that gives us another level of fragmentation, and that gives also a clue that how 1980s, which used to represent at least a unified state level Dalit discourse in UP, to a sub-regional level of fragmentation. He says that besides that, let me tell you also that Dalits of Western UP, Chandrashekhar Azad belongs to Western part of UP, Saharanpur. Dalits of Western UP are selfish. And that has been the fact. They are selfish because they join the party for their individual betterment and benefit, while the Dalits of Purvanchal are very emotional. They suffer individually, but they selflessly contribute to the party. And that is why, to Shravan Kumar Nirala, aligning with Chandrashekhar Azad is not a question just of reconciling incommensurable individual and leadership factor, but also the collective trait of Dalits from two seemingly different regions. A region wherein Dalits are always looking for some benefit and are selfish, that is Western UP. And a region wherein the Dalits are emotionally attached, and that is the Eastern UP. And we know that Eastern UP is economically more backward, and therefore the Dalits of Western UP always have a grudge vis-a-vis the Western counterpart, because not only the Dalits are politically powerful during the BSP phase, but also economically they are in a relatively better position. So this also gives us another level of fragment. And in Bundelkhand also, when you talk to Daddu Prasad, the same kind of the regional factors gets forefront and prime stage. So that gives us a clue that today what we are witnessing, that every Dalit votary of the young generation is normatively endorsing the call for Dalit unity, but with one factor, that the leadership question is not settled. In 1980s, the Dalits almost accepted that they need to have one platform, one party, and the party's leadership were accepted to all. Today, even within the Ambedkarite Dalit discourse, while there is a generational and sub-regional divide, there is also a divide as to who is going to lose. And that is why we are going to witness a fragmented Ambedkarite politics, which will witness further tussle within the same universe, because everyone will normatively endorse the call for a Dalit unity, but with the precondition that I should be the one who should be seeking and weaving that unity. So this is the fragmentation that we are witnessing within the Ambedkarite frame. Now, moving away from the Ambedkarite Dalit discourse and to the another dominant discourse which is gaining more currency, and that is Hindutva's Dalit discourse, wherein we are witnessing new actors from within the Dalit community who are emerging as the votary of the Dalit discourse within the Hindutva frame. And as we have said, that 1980s, when Kashiram and BSP started politicizing the Dalits within the Ambedkarite discourse, it had a caste structure. The one who joined the discourse and who imbibed the Ambedkarite worldview happened to be the two major subcastes who constitute more than 50% of the Dalit percentage. Dalits constitute around 22% of UP population. And more than half of that, around 56%, are two subcastes, Jatavs and Chamars. They are two different subcastes, but closely knit together. Now, they got radicalized, they got completely imbibed in the Ambedkarite worldview, while remaining 65 castes, in total Dalit caste in UP are 66, 65 castes, initially in late 80s and 1990s joined the BSP and the Bahujan discourse, but they did not share the same enthusiasm for the Ambedkarite discourse as was visible among the Jatavs and Chamars. And among that universe, three castes, namely Valmikis, Pasis, Pasis and Khatiks. These three castes were the ones who constituted second, third, and fourth numerous Dalit community after Jatavs and Chamars. They were the one to first abandon the unified Dalit discourse. And again, the frame of caste pride and cultural pride within their subcaste identity that started operating parallel, in fact, to the non-Jatav, non-Chamar subcaste. Besides their Ambedkarite worldview, their subcaste cultural worldview, which was non-Ambedkarite, always operated through. And these castes for every decade were almost, their state was like an oscillating pendulum, wherein they were oscillating between one, the attraction of a Dalit discourse within Ambedkarite frame, and also to the pulls and pressures of parallel incentives that they were witnessing within the among the Hindutva discourse. Now, we should remember that late 80s and 1990s, when India witnessed two dominant political frame of mobilization, one was through the frame of Hindutva, and other was through the frame of Mandal discourse, mobilizing the subaltern communities. There was also interface, a commonality between the two, while they two represented two different, one was seeking a religious mobilization of the Hindus, and the other has to be Muslims, while the Mandal discourse was seeking the unity of the subaltern community, wherein the other would be the Brahmanical upper caste. But within that, there was also a commonality. If you see the most aggressive phases of Hindutva discourse, even during the heydays of the Mandal movement of 1990s, you find that the most radical phases were represented by people belonging to the OBCs. You have the Chief Minister Kalyan Singh of UP, under whose reign Babri Mosque was demolished. And during his last days, I mean, he died a couple of years ago, he said, no regret, no repentance. That time, Bajrang Dal, which is a very radically assertive group under the VHP, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, it was being headed by Vinay Katiyar, a young leader from UP belonging to Kurmi OBC caste. You have Firebrand leader who was representing the saffron, gender, all sort of discourse fused together, Uma Bharti and OBC. The foundation stone of the Ram temple in April 1989 was laid down by a Dalit from Bihar, Kameshwar Pasi. So my point is that Hindutva discourse, even during the heydays of Mandal, was very consciously weaving a subaltern foundation of the Hindutva phase, which will become not only a passive supporter, but become the active anchor of the Hindutva discourse. And today, when you see 2014 onward, when Modi is at the forefront, you see that entire investment of the foundational strategy of Hindutva discourse, whom in late 1980s, the then General Secretary of BJP, K.N. Govindacharya, called as social engineering. Social engineering wherein not the Brahmins, but OBCs are the bulwark of Hindutva, and therefore the faces of Hindutva discourse has to be OBCs, primarily OBCs. And then, so Modi represents that investment. And in 2014 onward, when Modi is becoming that phase, you find an OBC-led Hindutva discourse. Hindutva discourse is...
How long do you think you will take?
5 more minutes.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
So OBC-led Hindutva discourse is now trying to expand the core ambit of Hindutva support base by bringing more Dalits and more tribals. And that is why you see you have a Dalit president, you have a tribal president, you have a kind of OBC vice president chosen by an OBC prime minister. So you find an OBC-led Hindutva discourse is further trying to subalternize the Hindutva discourse. So this is one. Now, the ones which the section of the Dalits that Hindutva discourse is making an outreach to and who are becoming a part of that, the core, happen to be primarily the non-Jatav, non-Chamar Dalits. And the best example could be given when we were covering the 2022 UP election, and in Hathras, wherein the Hathras incident, quite a very tragic event, wherein Valmiki Dalit, a non-Jatav Dalit girl, was sexually assaulted and murdered, and thereafter her dead body was cremated by the police personnel without giving much access to their family members. So that was one of the tragedy wherein Dalits were angry, and you see from Bhim Army to all political parties were mobilizing, and the Dalit anger was visible. And closer to the election, mind it, in the election from Hathras, BJP won the seat. Not only it won, but it won with a huge margin of more than almost 110,000. But we had the clue because when we started going to the Valmiki colonies and asking the question that what is the state of Dalits, and from the Valmiki vantage point, they admitted that they have been at the receiving end, but they stopped short of blaming the BJP. And in a very raw language, if you take the subtle assumption, they were making a distinction between atrocity on Dalit being a social problem and not linking it to the BJP. Why? Because they had, in hindsight, the comparative frame of the treatment or the state of Valmiki Dalits under the Samajwadi Party, which is still to the larger Dalits across the Dalit spectrum, is still perceived to be the most atrocious regime as far as the Dalits are concerned. And even to the BSP, wherein most of the Valmikis said that while it talked about the entire Dalit unity, primarily it catered to just two castes, that is the Dalits and Jatavs and Chamars, along with the Muslims. And therefore, they found more resonance with the BJP because the RSS and BJP had been outreaching, giving more representation to Valmikis. And therefore, their reference was that we are going to vote to our party. So it's almost an internalization of the BJP, like you find Jatavs and Chamars internalizing the BSP. So that sort of phenomena is emerging today because what we are witnessing is the retention of the cultural identity of the individual Dalit caste. And therefore, a united Dalit discourse that wanted the individual subcaste identity to be dissolved as a precondition is a moment of crisis, not only for the BSP, but for the entire Dalit discourse. And therefore, today, when we see the implication, what we are witnessing, that this fragmentation within the Ambedkarite framework and within Ambedkarite and Hindutva Dalit framework is going to continue, because when you find a new generation of the Dalits who are aspirational, who want to move away, but who also have a sense of anxiety, feeling that those aspirations cannot be easily met. So they are looking for a savior, a platform that can give them a sense of solace. And therefore, Hindutva discourse has one advantage vis-a-vis, say, the secular left and the Ambedkarite frame, that it has the language and the agency to endorse the individual cultural aspiration of the Dalit identity. Because subaltern religiosity is a fact, and if we witness when today, 22nd, Pran Pratishtha at Ayodhya is going to happen, you find a Brahmanical version of Hindutva is opposing the Pran Pratishtha. Shankaracharyas are opposing. And the popular subaltern Hindutva framework or the subaltern religiosity is in complete defiance of the ritual sanctity of that occasion and is going ahead. It is getting a popular resonance. Mind it, in 2019, 5th August, when Modi laid down the foundation for this temple, then also Shankaracharyas has opposed it for being inauspicious. So what today you find that the BJP's and RSS Hindutva is no more representing the core Brahmanical religiosity. It has already embraced the subaltern religiosity, which includes Dalits religiosity, OBC's religiosity, tribal religiosity, and is willing to be more malleable and fluid vis-a-vis the ritual sanctity. And therefore, this popularity among the Dalit caste, when you see the anxiety aspect, which is looking for some solace when their economic aspiration is not being met, Hindutva has a structural advantage. And that is why in the times to come, what we are going to witness is that a dynamic process of fragmentation, wherein while the shrinking base of Ambedkarite Dalit discourse will be internally fragmented, Hindutva at this juncture has an advantage to consolidate the non-Ambedkarite Dalit discourse. And this is going to be one of the unfolding. And in coming election, with the further decline of the BSP, what we are going to witness that while the Ambedkarite Dalit discourse will fragment among the Congress and so many other parties, we may witness that the non-Ambedkarite Dalit discourse, that is the non-Jatav, non-Chamar, and similarly in Maharashtra, it could be Mahars and Matangs, etc., they will move more towards the Hindutva discourse and electorally towards the BJP. This is the state of the field at this juncture in UP and in the neighboring states. Thank you.
Thank you. You have answered many questions. Now, basically what I will do is that there are some people in the audience here who I can invite to ask questions. I think while people are figuring out their questions, I can just begin by asking my first question, which is that you have clearly argued that in the 1980s and beyond that with Kanshi Ram and others, there was an understanding that Dalits have to have a face, and ultimately it became the face of Mayawati. And today you are saying that Dalit politics has become very fragmented. So there is Western UP, there is Purvanchal, there is Bundelkhand, and there are, let's say, the offshoots of the non-BJP types who are unable to come together. So obviously under Mayawati, there was a way in which that person could bring together, right, various aspirations. And now one of the problems is the crisis of a unified leadership. Now, how much of this crisis is really the result of Mayawati's backing out rather than the leaderships not being able to come together? I ask this question because in the previous elections in Uttar Pradesh, as we saw, Mrs. Mayawati, she came unannounced towards the end and drew a lot of votes away from the non-BJP combined. That would have actually led to a smaller margin of victory in many seats for the BJP. So it looks like a BJP cop-out, really. So my question is that is a variable that you have not discussed in your presentation. That why does Mayawati behave surreptitiously in a way that actually helps the BJP? Now we know that in the past, Mayawati tried to have an identity with the SP. It did not work out. The backward castes have been fairly oppressive towards the Dalits. Sudha's earlier book on Madhya Pradesh highlights that very clearly. So my question is that why, I mean, there is one Hindutvaizing certain ethnicities argument, right? And there is also a BSP leader who is not projecting herself in a way that can help the opposition. In fact, my friend KP Singh sometimes tells that now is the time for Mayawati to come back. Now, how do you see these kinds of arguments? I mean, why has the identity of Mayawati also changed, which might contribute to some of the arguments that you're making on the ground? Yes, please, the floor is yours.
Ma'am, you need to unmute.
How do I?
Yes. See, the BSP begins as a very radical force in the early 1990s under Kanshi Ram, and then Mayawati comes into the party as well. That phase of the party was one of anti-Congressism, of describing other parties as Manuvadi, mainstream, upper caste parties, and so on. But from the mid-1990s, after the failure of that Bahujan experiment with the SP, and the party undergoes a change. You see, when social movements become institutionalized into political parties and become political parties in the pursuit of power, there comes a change. A lot of compromise happens in terms of ideology, in terms of strategy, and so on. So I think the BSP underwent a change, and in the second half of the 1990s, the earlier promise of what was seen as Dalit assertion, and the attempt to gain inequality, to gain equality, etc. The whole Dalit project undergoes a change. She joins hands with the BJP and so on and so forth. So there is the undercurrent of wanting power. Now, of course, in the 2000s, the party is in decline, partly because of what happened due to the Sajjan experiment, and also because of changes, as I mentioned in my own presentation, that Dalit community itself has undergone a change. Dalits today no longer see themselves the way they used to in the 1990s. There's much greater self-confidence. There's a desire to move ahead and so on. And therefore, they do not see it necessary to have the kind of party that the BSP was earlier. Each one of them is striking out on their own, these various groups as such. So, hence the fragmentation. Now, why is Mayawati not coming out? One very, simple explanation that journalists put forward is that she's afraid of going to jail. It will use the ED and the CBI against her. That she has been very corrupt, and therefore, if anything was done against, any investigation was done, she would be held responsible. So that is one way of looking at it, that she is afraid of that. And Dalits on the ground will tell you that agar wo jail jayegi, if she goes to jail, every Dalit will be on the road. And so they also find it very perplexing that she is not out there. But it's also because the nature of the BSP has changed. She no longer has the leaders that she had earlier. Naziruddin, Siddiqui, Babu Kushwaha, so many of the others have left the party. The party today, the party organization is completely hollowed out. And so therefore, she does not have the kind of support within the party, and she does not have the kind of leaders that she had earlier in order to put up a strong movement. So on the one hand, there is a desertion by Dalits of the BSP towards the party, the BJP, and also to people like Chandrashekhar Azad and others striking out on their own. And on the other hand, there is the breakdown and unraveling of the BSP. The party has become hollowed out. I don't think Mayawati has now a party with which she can step out and campaign forcefully as she did, for example, in the early 2000s when she won a majority in 2007. So a lot of it is, I would say, it is changes within the Dalit community. It is the hollowing out of its own party, which is the failure of Mayawati, undoubtedly. And thirdly, there is more trite explanation that she is afraid that the BJP would, simply put her in jail as such. So Mayawati's movement, but at the same time, as I said earlier, the very success of the movement has brought it to this point of being unraveled. You see, the Dalit movement was meant to provide confidence to Dalits. Having gained that confidence, now they're turning around and asking, what has the BSP given us? We are still as poor. In fact, in 2012, why did she lose? She had done so much in UP, and a lot of changes had taken place. But Dalits had this thought that they would become like the upper class. Now that was simply not possible. The upper caste were an elite economic group which had controlled the economy for a long time. All contracts still went to them. The ability to take up those contracts, the ability to make use of any kind of proposition or any kind of funds that were available were largely with the upper class. So Dalits found that not much change took place. 5 years is too short a period of time. So I think all of these factors have come together and made the BSP a party which is today incapable of stepping out and doing the kind of strong campaign that it was capable of doing earlier.
Yes, questions? Yeah. So maybe one by one you can come. Maybe Pratik, you can come, then Makia, and then Zed. And we can take a couple of questions together.
Yeah. Thanks for the talk. It was really interesting. I've been reading the book. I've finished the first part of it, and it's really can't wait to finish the whole thing. But I kind of have two questions. One is more immediate, and the second one is a bit more, I guess, theoretical, perhaps. So Mayawati just today actually announced that she'd be fighting the elections alone, in the Lok Sabha elections. How do you see that happening? Because there's a lot of, there's different assessments of that. One says that she will take away the Dalit votes from the opposition and end up kind of, benefiting BJP and so on. So where do you see that happening? And the second question is kind of, so you've talked about Ambedkarite Dalits and Hindutva Dalits, and from what I understand is the way BJP has tried and RSS have kind of worked their politics of including different social groups is through, what social engineering and these kinds of things, which is kind of an assimilationist project. It's not really one which shows assertion or not annihilation of caste in kind of any way. That's kind of my understanding of it. It's by kind of including some leaders, creating small leaders out of smaller backward castes or non-Jata Dalit castes and so on. But without having a central focus which includes caste assertion or steps towards equalization or annihilation, do you see any kind of, inherent, like a contradiction between how their politics works of assimilating smaller castes, but without challenging, the normative kind of, let's say, caste structure? That's at least how I see it. So I would kind of, like to know your thoughts on that. Is that how you see how they kind of, include other castes in their fold? And do you see some kind of, like some contradiction there with how it works? Yeah.
Yeah, to the first part of the question as to why Mayawati is not aligning with the India alliance and knowing that she is still having more than 10% of the Dalit support base, that's the bottom minimum we expect, and not joining the alliance is going to it's going to favor BJP. Now, talking in the field to many of the BSP supporters, and there is one thing that while theoretically we have a Ambedkarite Dalit discourse and a Hindutva Dalit discourse, the BSP and the BJP, the question of how the Mayawati's own support base, that is the Jatav and Chamar Dalits, how do they witness Samajwadi Party? And therein there is a question of non-committal. Institutionally, besides the hanging swords of going to prison, etc., if she moves against BJP, there is also another deeper anxiety. And the anxiety is, one, the non-Dalits have already deserted BSP. Two, since 2012, Muslims have been deserting BSP. In the last 2017 election, just 6% Muslims voted for BSP, and 2022, the percentage is further less. So in that backdrop, BSP leaders also, and this is, I'm saying a personal anecdote, many BSP leaders are fearing that while it is impossible, and that's what they think, to defeat BJP in 2024, they say that arithmetic is clear. Congress is weak, and without a national party, you cannot defeat. But in UP, if SP witnessed a revival at a time when BSP is being abandoned by non-Dalit, including the Muslims, a strengthened Samajwadi Party means BSP's core vote will also be eaten out. And therefore, they have to protect this vote bank, even if it means electoral benefit to the BJP. Because BSP is not willing to lose its existence and become a completely irrelevant force, even in terms of the vote percentage. This is one. And that adds to why when Farooq Abdullah last month went to negotiate to Mayawati, she demanded 40 seats. And when Farooq Abdullah said what will be left for other parties, because besides Samajwadi Party, there is Congress, there is RLD, and there could be Azad Samaj Party of Chandrashekhar Azad, who has a political party, and many independents. She said that we have a vote which is transferable, and therefore this is our basic condition. So that time she left the door open, but that was completely that. Besides the BJP's fear factor, there is also a deeper anxiety that if Samajwadi Party is strengthened, her Dalit vote base also may be eaten up, and she may lose the plot forever. So this is one. Coming to the question of why the Hindutva Dalit discourse, while it is succeeding in uniting the non-Jatav or the non-Ambedkarite Dalit base and assimilating within the Hindutva discourse, which also has an electoral translatability, does it mean just a passive assimilation or also a sense of transformative politics that we have been witnessing? Now, here is the difference. The answer is very simple, because Hindutva frame doesn't endorse a transformative politics within Hinduism, which has an element of protest. Hindutva Dalit discourse operates through two sorts of incentives for the subaltern masses. One is the representative aspect, and second is the cultural endorsement aspect. Now, the representation aspect for BJP is very easy. And today, if you see the profile of BJP from top up to the district level, BJP effectively today is the largest OBC party. And this is the empirical fact, because every state, it is the assertive, dominant OBCs who are against BJP, primarily the Yadavs in UP, Bihar, Jats in Haryana, Marathas in Maharashtra, and similarly in many other parts. But if you take the larger stock of OBCs who are the non-dominant OBCs, they are not only supporting it, but today they are the core of the Hindutva discourse. Why? Because unlike other parties, secular parties or the social justice-centric OBC or Dalit-centric parties, who have to give a certain percentage of representation to the Muslims, and in UP and Bihar, you have to give them a substantial representation, BJP doesn't have such foundation. So what BJP does, that, say for example, if Mayawati in 2017 said that we are going to field 100 Muslims out of 403 seats. So 100 means 1/4 of the assembly tickets is already now reserved for the Muslims for BSP. And in competition, Samajwadi Party also will do the same. Congress will also compete. What will BJP do? BJP will put OBC candidates in most of those 100 seats. So Dalit, OBC, and Congress Muslim candidate facing BJP OBC candidate. So you see, Hindutva discourse is getting subalternized and Muslims are becoming the common other. So BJP can afford to field more OBCs without minimizing the quota of the upper castes. So that gives BJP a representative edge, and that you see the profile of BJP today, from being powerful minister like Bhupendra Yadav or Dharmendra Pradhan, who are almost like people who go to resolve the crisis everywhere, to Modi himself representing that set. Another thing is the cultural endorsement project, and as I said, that Hindutva discourse, it aims to transform the nature of Hindu identity by not only giving electoral and political representation, but also giving them a sense of cultural endorsement. And that goes in sync with the ground scenario wherein they are also seeking a sense of caste and cultural pride. No other discourse has that sort of resources within its own framework. And that is why the transformative aspect, when you see from the Hindutva discourse vantage point, is completely against the element of protest. It seeks more like a harmonizing the fault line rather than accentuating it. That differentiates it from the older model of Ambedkarite or the social justice centric project. So to Hindutva project, a Dalit transformation and the subaltern transformation is in more political and electoral representation and a deeper endorsement of their cultural desire to find respectability in their own subcaste identity. And that is why the question of transformation within two discourse undergoes a complete change, changed contour.
Okay, great. Matthias?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you a lot for the talk. And so I have two questions. The first question would be, you have also mentioned it shortly, the difference between policies of the BJP and the BSP towards Dalits, and how the Dalits have been actually profiting from both these regimes. So the question, oftentimes the BSP is being criticized for building monuments and But also on the same side, there was the so-called Ambedkar Village program. And so I would be interested how that has been playing out. Has there been any progress? And compared to the situation right now under the BJP, do they have any specific policies which support Dalits directly? And then the second question that I have is regarding the leadership of the BSP. So yeah, Mayawati is giving more and more power to her nephew Akash Anand. And the question is, yeah, in what form do you see him becoming a more grassroots leader, or is he having a similar approach than Mayawati? Is he also more hiding from the scene? And do you think there might be again a clash between subcastes, maybe in between the Jatavs coming from the BSP and then more the other non-Jatav chamas in Chandrashekhar Azad's party, and then the yeah, other non-Jatavs which are rather supporting the BJP? Yeah, that would be my two questions. Thank you.
I take the first question. If I've understood you correctly, you want to know what is it that the BJP does to attract Dalits towards it. Well, I think one must see it at two levels. One, historically, what has been happening, and secondly, what has been happening in the more immediate way, which is building actually on the historical model as such. And from the late 19th century, Hinduization of the smaller subcastes has been there. You know, in UP, for example, as was mentioned, there are 66 various subcastes of Dalits. Among them, the Chamar Jatavs have always been in the forefront and have been the vanguard of any kind of movement, and that was true in the colonial period. The others living in who are smaller in number, in fact, in the colonial period, it was said that they feared and respected the Jatavs. So, you know, there is a sort of caste system even below the line of pollution in that sense. So, we find that the Valmikis, particularly, for example, who after 1857 came into the various cities in order to do cleaning and so on for the British, a certain process of Hinduization by the Arya Samaj, by the RSS later, by the Hindu Mahasabha, etc., a whole range of organizations with Hinduization, and therefore, they were influenced by this long process as such. In the post-independence period, this continues, but at a more subterranean level. And if you look at the 90s, the BSP is able to, because of rising Dalit assert, is able to bring at least temporarily all of these together. And as I've said earlier also, insofar as voting was concerned. You see, if you actually did field work, even when Mayawati was the chief minister, you would be told, well, we don't like her aligning with the BJP, but it's a Dalit party and she's going to help us and so on. And so therefore, there was a certain support to the BSP. But by the end of the decade, identity politics weakens. See, it went up and the whole importance of identity politics came down. And Dalits also experienced a certain amount of dignity, self-confidence, some amount of empowerment. The spread of the power of the vote in UP was a very, very, very big thing. And there is also a certain improvement in literacy through the 90s. So we find that by the 2000s, the smaller Dalits have become far more assertive. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, the RSS BJP mobilizes Dalits on a large scale. For example, there is the attempt to find Dalit icons in the past. Pasi Rajas, people who were important historically, and to give them importance. So certain cultural, a feeling that they care for the culture of the Dalits and importance and respect to that was given. To just give you one example from the more present day. If you go to Modi's Varanasi constituency. In one of the villages, I don't remember the name, there is a temple which has been built by BJP workers to Shabari, who was one of the members of the, one of the persons within the Ramayana. And, the villagers are very, very happy with it. That at least somebody has, built a temple or Ravidas temples that are being built and so on and so forth. So the BJP is consciously trying to bring them into the Hindu fold. They are told that when Ram was in the forest in the Ramayana, it was the Dalits, the Malas, the boatmen, the smaller subcastes who really looked after him. So there's been a whole cultural project. And that cultural project has been made use intellectually. So there is a cultural project, there is of course welfare schemes. I'm not denying that. So there is a well-planned strategy of what we in an earlier book called non-Brahminical Hindutva, or today we have called it subaltern Hindutva. That is, Hindutva has been reconstructed in a way so as to bring the Dalits into it. And if you look at the Muzaffarnagar riots, a lot of the rioting, Dalits were on the side of the Hindus and not on the side of the Muslims. Parties like the BSP suffered because their social base straddles the Hindu and the Muslim. And so they were caught very badly in these riots. So the BJP under Modi has made conscious strategies to be able to gain the support of the smaller subclasses by promising them economic incentives, by cultural uplift, because they now see the Jatov, the BSP as the Jatov Party, as they're having very little role within it. So it's been a project of its own, a cultural and a social project. And for example, Modi washed the feet of a Valmiki during the Kumbh Mela and so on. So I think this has been an entire project which has been put forward, and the many strategies by which they have been able to do it. Today, they don't need to use a communal strategy any longer for that reason. Second question I would leave to
Yeah. Almost its answer. But adding to that, there is also one pattern that today you see also the Ambedkar has become accessible to all the discourses. It is no more the old 80s and 90s, wherein there was a clearly dividing line on the take of Ambedkar. And the resources are one, the conscious realization on part of the Hindutva to embrace Ambedkar, icons of the Ambedkar, and two, Ambedkar's eclectic style of writing, which gives every discourse something within his writing to cherry pick and present it as a dominant fact. And today you see in the current regime of BJP, Ambedkar happens to be almost like a punctuation mark, a full stop to justify all the policies. So when they abolished Article 370 in Kashmir, they dig the statement Ambedkar, and Ambedkar has a very statist point of view into the Constituent Assembly debate that India has to be integrated. And then you also find Ambedkar's own very adversarial mode of writing in Thoughts on Pakistan, a book published in 3 editions, 44 to 1946, wherein he gives Hindu case for Pakistan, Muslim case for Pakistan. And in Hindu case of Pakistan, Ambedkar clearly outlays that what are the justification as to why Pakistan should not be given. So today you find also that Ambedkar is accessible, and the way BJP today is celebrating Ambedkar, not only symbolically, but also building institutions. So you have Ambedkar International Center in Delhi, and many studies and everything is happening. And then coupled with the conscious embracement of the Dalits, and that coupled with the kind of welfare measures and public policy outreach, now that has made often the mode of cultural versus material politics, that binary no more exists. In Hindutva discourse, you find that the cultural project of Hindutva, coupled with their material politics of outreaching the Dalits and other subaltern masses through direct benefit, and that was very much visible in, say, for example, in Madhya Pradesh, one of the state election recently, when Ladli Behna Yojana, majority of the tribal and a significant section of the Dalit and OBC women voted for BJP. So you find that today Hindutva operates in layers. I mean, it doesn't move into singularity, and it has embedded and interwoven the cultural and material politics so thickly that it becomes very difficult for the parties which are still stuck into the old mode of cultural versus material politics to unravel the discourse. And that is why not only BJP is endorsing the new icons from among the OBC, Dalit and tribal community, it has almost embraced Ambedkar, and therefore it becomes very difficult for the other parties to deal with that kind of a package that BJP offers vis-a-vis other parties.
Great. I think this has been a wonderful introduction to a very, very important book. Mia, I think we will not be able to get you asked the question because this auditorium is now booked for the next event, and Jay has tells us that his question has already been answered. So he doesn't need to answer that question. So I do think that this kind of talk followed by the discussion perhaps gives many nuanced answers that one will be even searching for in the book, and which you have clarified during the talk. So I think it tells us very clearly that it's a very important book because Professor Sudha Pai's earlier book on Dalit assertion was very important. There was the book by Kanchan Chandra and others. I think the whole idea that identity politics matters has not become any less important. From what you're saying is that how identity politics is mattering today is somewhat different from how identity politics mattered in the past. And one significant difference is that from just being able to project your identity, there is greater assertiveness in the identity itself, which is a marker of change. And along with that marker of change is the fact that Hindutva, even though it is more directed in the direction of OBC politics, is able to do a fairly nuanced job of convincing at least subsections of the Dalit community that they are safer from the OBCs if they voted the BJP. And that sounds like a fairly rational calculation on the ground, because we know that the battlefield in many rural areas is not between upper castes and Dalits. It is between the OBCs and Dalits. And having garnered control over the Dalit community, OBC community, if they can look to be safer than, let's say, a Yadav-led party, then, let's say Dalit protection or Dalit assertion might be in safer areas, which also tells you that the opposition needs a narrative. Many people have been telling the opposition that it needs a narrative on Hinduism. It needs a non-material cultural narrative, and hopefully what is happening to Dalit politics and to Hindutva will inspire such a narrative. But I think you have actually given a good answer to why the politics has changed. And therefore, your book would be a very important one to read and to reflect in relation to what had happened in the past. So thank you very, very much for finding the time. And I'm sure when I get to Delhi, I will connect with you. But to both of you, if you're flying past Frankfurt or anywhere in the continent, let us know. We have a fairly lively discussion here. We get all kinds of people to talk. And certainly this has been one of the liveliest and very, very enlightening for me personally as well. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll keep in touch. I'll have to let go because this is, this is Dr. Syed Hussain Darhani, who is the assistant professor in the department. There is Mostafizur Rahman, who is just going to defend very shortly. He was helping us with research. Now he's finished up his PhD. I see another student, David Weiss, who is there. I think Jaffilo's co-author was with us for some time and left. And you've already met, there was Aditya Srivastava here, who is co-authoring some work with me on attacks on civil society. He's a German Chancellor Fellow, and Farhan Zahir is here, who's a PhD student. So just to let you know that we had a very, very good time. You haven't seen everybody, but maybe Farhan and Aditya, you can
Just show our faces.
show your faces.
I'm Aditya.
Oh.
So Sajjan, this is fascinating work. I can now see why Sudha was so excited about doing this work.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, let's catch up.
Thank you. Sure, sir.
Sudha, thanks as ever, and we'll be in touch.
We'll meet.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.